Hello. So for my special education timeline, I have first up Brown versus Board of Education 1954, the Supreme Court case that the ending of the racial segregation in schools before schools were segregated and students with disabilities were often excluded for a poor treated. The change that set a precedent for changing unfair treatment in education, including for students with disabilities. Next, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, 1965. The law was provided the extra funds to the schools with low-income students. Before the schools had equal resource and less support students with disabilities, the change began to include support for students with disabilities to improve resource. And next, an Education for All Handicapped Children Act, EAHCA, 1975. The law was required for free public education for all children with disabilities. Before, the students with disabilities were excluded or placed in separate facilities. The change that happened was to ensure the access to public schools were tolerable for education for students with disabilities. Next, we have Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act of IDEA in 1990. What happened was the updated EAHCA was the board of definitions of the new support services. Before, the limited special education services with less focus on life after school. Change that happened was that to improve the education plans and support, including transaction planning. And next up, we have number 5, Americans with Disabilities and Act ADA 1990. The law was prohibited in discrimination against people with disabilities in areas including education. Before there was no comprehensive laws to ensure the equal access for people with disabilities. Changing schools and public places with accessible and fair. Next, No Children Left Behind Act, NCLB, in 2001. What happened was that the law requiring schools to meet performances standards and test students regularly. Before, less focus was consistent on standards and accountable for students with disabilities. The change that was made schools accountable for students' progress and highlighting the needs for additional support. And last, we have Every Student Succeeds in Act, ESSA, in 2015. What happened was that the law was replaced and the NCLB, allowing the states more control over education standards. Before, it was strict federal rules and testing accountability. The change that happened was that more flexible to meet the needs for all students, including those with disabilities. And thank you. That is my educational timeline.